Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Marvel Fan Theories podcast. I'm Taylor.
And I'm Katie, and we're two sisters and borderline obsessed Marvel fans who have been following the Marvel Cinematic Universe closely for years. And now we want to share our MCU discussions with you.
We chat about our own predictions and theories, plus some of our favorites from online, and our reactions to all of the Marvel content that's considered MCU canon, including the Disney Plus shows and the movies, as well as the Marvel news you need to know. We have a very special episode for you guys today with a special guest. We're going to be tackling one of the biggest debates in all of the Marvel fandom, which is, across various different elements and in a few different categories, who is the best Spider-Man between Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland. Katie, why don't you tell everybody what we're going to be talking about in a little more detail?
So, to start off, I don't think you can just pick one. And I mean, maybe there are people who can, but I think that's really hard. I think the debate is because you can't just pick one in all aspects. I think there's so many different topics, and that's why for this podcast we're trying, or at least we tried, to break it down into almost 10 different categories for which Spider-Man we like best and where, or Peter Parker, or maybe that's kind of a question, so we'll get to that later, but you know, which actor we liked best in those pivotal moments. So we're going to be breaking those down a little bit more so that we can really look at them and pick apart which one we think fits best in all of those. And then, of course, we'll wrap it up with all of us speaking our absolute favorite overall.
Awesome. Before we dive into that, though, there is something that I need to correct, and it has been weighing on me since I figured out exactly what I said a few episodes ago. We were talking about, what we might see in a future Tom Holland trilogy, in a so-called college trilogy, if you will. And I talked about Catwoman being in it, but I made a very egregious error.
She did.
And gave her, yeah, I did. But I gave Catwoman the name of Selina Kyle, which for all of you who, may bridge between Marvel and DC, know that that is in fact DC's version of Catwoman, whereas Marvel's version of Catwoman is Felicia Hardy. I should know that too. I loved the Christopher Nolan movies growing up, so that one's on me, guys, but I just wanted to quickly make that correction so that I actually know what I'm talking about, and that was just a moment of weakness. But now that that's all over with, let's introduce our guest. So we have a longtime friend of mine who I met in college, and he's going to talk a little bit about his experience as a Marvel fan, and then we're going to get right into it.
Hi everyone, my name is Davis. Like Taylor said, we've been very good friends since freshman year of college. We lived on the same floor, and our friendship has kind of blossomed since. And a huge component of our friendship happens to be Marvel movies and the MCU, and so that's kind of what we bonded over the years with, and, even had some of our best arguments over. And so I'm a big fan of the podcast, and I feel like it's been a big time coming because we used to call each other, the three of us, after each episode of the WandaVision series and Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And so I think it's been a long time coming that I finally was able to be on the podcast. So thank you guys for having me, and I'm excited to talk Spidey.
Yeah, we're pumped to have you, man. So thanks for joining us. Katie, why don't you take it away with our first category?
Okay, so naturally we're gonna move through some of the smaller categories into the bigger, although the big get fast. So essentially there's one smaller category, and then they move into the bigger categories. But I was trying to organize them in a logical way. Don't know if that worked. But to start off, we're gonna start with who are the best New Yorkers? So the best representation of the people of New York in all of their movies. So taking in all accounts.
Well, as the only person who lives in New York on this podcast, I will go first. I personally think it's Tobey. One of the things that I really liked when watching his trilogy was how in at least I can think of off the top of my head, Spider-Man and then Spider-Man 2, there was a moment where the city helps him. So in the first movie, Green Goblin is hanging Mary Jane off, I believe, the Queensboro Bridge, and he's trying to save both her and the kids in the Roosevelt Island tram. And the New Yorkers actually throw things at the Green Goblin to help distract him so that Spidey's able to save everybody. So I really liked that. And then there's another moment in Spider-Man 2 where he had just stopped a train from derailing after Doc Ock kind of basically took the brakes off, and he's unmasked and everything, and they all kind of help bring him, lay him down on the floor of the subway. Gross, but helpful. And they all tell him, we know we've seen your face, but, we won't tell anybody. We'll keep your secret. So I think for those reasons, I really like how the city visibly rallies around Tobey and his trilogy. I think more so than any of the other Spider-Men.
Yeah, so I think I agree. I definitely think the look and feel of New York City, granted, I've never been there, but I think just based on other pieces of media, I feel like New York City and the New Yorkers are best represented in the Tobey Maguire films. It's also just a more happier New York. I think the color grading, not to get to the nitty gritty of film, but the color grading is very bright and vibrant. And most of Tobey's time is spent, interacting with New Yorkers. And I feel like that doesn't really happen in the other films. Like in the Tom Holland films, especially in the second one, in Far From Home, he's off in Europe. He's never really in New York City. Now, granted, Andrew didn't get a third movie, but in all three of Tobey's films, it's spent, he's going to plays, he's going to coffee shops, he's interacting with New Yorkers more frequently. So I agree with all the points that Taylor made, but I do want to give the New York and New Yorkers in The Amazing Spider-Man credit, because in that end scene when Andrew's trying to get to the tower where the lizard is scaling to release the bomb, not all the New Yorkers, but some construction workers gang together and align the cranes to help Andrew swing from crane to crane. Because otherwise, he would not have gotten to the tower in time. Dr. Connors would have released the lizard bomb, and all the New Yorkers would have turned into lizards. So I thought that was a very powerful moment. But at the end of the day, I agree with you, Taylor. I think Tobey has the best New York City / New Yorkers.
Yeah, so I feel like going last is going to be hard for me because I agree with Taylor, and then I think Davis said it best, and he actually said roughly what I was going to say, where I know this isn't necessarily a rank, but if I were to rank them, it would be going Tobey, Andrew, Tom for this question. Tobey, to Davis's point, you sat there, he was in the city, you felt that he was the New Yorker he was. Just even he went to Columbia by the second one, he was in school there, you just felt it with him, and you felt the New Yorkers behind him. I think in The Amazing Spider-Man, I thought, especially the first one was interesting, where you see how the police are very against him, which I actually really like, because he's like that vigilante. And then you obviously see that change of pace, and obviously, Gwen being involved kind of thing also helps. And then with Tom, I don't really think yet we've seen a lot of the big New York moment. I think that's coming, but for now, I would have to give it fully to Tobey. And I promise y'all, we are not going to be agreeing on all of these. We might agree on 1 to 2 others, maybe 3, but the rest of them, it'll be a little different. But this one I definitely also have to give to Tobey. But moving into the next one, which is already one of the harder questions. Who had the best suit?
Oh, for me, that's easy. I mean, I really love the pronounced webbing, so for that reason, I really like Tobey's. Katie and I always talk about how we used to watch the late 90s, early 2000s Spider-Man animated show growing up, and to me, Tobey's is the live action version of that suit. So the fact that he brought my childhood suit to life, while I was still pretty much a child while his trilogy was coming out, I don't know, for that reason, I'm just always going to be partial to his suit.
Okay, and here we go. We're no longer agreeing on stuff. For me, I think the best suit is Tom, strictly because there's a variety of suits, right? Because he has his OG hoodie, pajamas, almost suit that he made himself, and then he quickly gets the Stark suit, and then there's the Iron Spider suit, and then in No Way Home, I think it's the Iron Spider suit combines with the Stark suit, almost. Is that what that combination is at the end?
Yeah, and let's not forget Night Monkey.
Sorry, how could I
Night
forget
Monkey
the
suit.
sleek, all-black look? No, I just think...
Which honestly was pretty iconic,
Yeah.
I have to say.
Yeah, and I liked that look a lot. He kind of just looked like a burglar, which I feel like is kind of ironic, because most of the time, Peter / Spider-Man is trying to stop burglars. But Taylor, I also agree with how Tobey's suit is kind of textured and all that stuff, but for me, at least, I was always confused how Tobey and Andrew made their suits. That was kind of glossed over. It's like, oh, they were doing research and there was that montage of the drawing and the colors. But at least with Tom, like, that's something that all the three of us could do if we became superheroes. The OG, like, hoodie pajama suit is something that we could easily make. So yeah, that's why I'm going to go with Tom, just because there's a wider variety and there's so many, like, gadgets and gizmos in each of those suits, especially the Stark one. So that's why I got to say Tom has the best suit.
I'm going to have to agree with Taylor. I don't know what it is about Tobey's suit. I mean, I know it's the whole webbing and the, like, really being able to see it, because I do think I want to say original Stark suit, you really don't see it as much, so it really just looks like red, and it's like that really dark blue, and then at one point it's I think black too. So I really like that aspect. I think Andrew's was a little grimier, the whole franchise, so I think they made his suit that way, so it didn't, like, speak to me. But after that, Iron Spidey also takes pretty high up there. I
love Iron Spidey.
I just like the suit itself from the comics, so finally seeing it come out was really, really cool. But yeah, Tobey for me still has the best suit, hands down. Now, if we don't agree on this next one, I'm gonna be a little mad.
She told me this ahead of time, so I had to, like, work my way into the correct answer because I don't feel like getting beat up the next time I come home.
I don't know how you had to work your way there, but it should have already been correct. But who's the best love interest?
Let me go about my reasoning for this. It's more of just like a process of elimination because I didn't feel strongly for one reason or another about any of them. So, first of all, with Mary Jane, Kirsten Dunst's version in the Tobey trilogy, Katie and I know, have talked about this, even on this pod. We've said, she's kind of just the damsel in distress. Like, she doesn't do a lot to really help herself. She just kind of gets stuck in a web or stuck in a taxi or stuck in a web in a taxi or, any variation of the like, and just kind of screams for, like, every time she's on screen. So, not great, really. She also, honestly, the whole, I'm with Harry, but I'm going to cheat with Peter, and now I'm with Peter, and then I'm going to cheat with Harry, like, she just kind of doesn't really know what she wants, and she hurts everybody around her, and I just don't love her. Now moving on to Gwen. Definitely a better representation of women. She's much more independent. However, I will say her death is partially on her because Peter didn't want her there to begin with, so if she hadn't been there, if she hadn't gone to the grid...
I assume you're talking about Andrew's Gwen, right? Not the Spider-Man 3 Gwen?
Yes, sorry. We're talking Amazing Spider-Man Gwen. Emma... Is that Emma Stone?
Yeah.
Yeah, Emma Stone.
Yes.
There's one other Emma who I always get confused with. But yes, Emma Stone. If she hadn't gone there, and forced herself into that situation, even though she knew it was dangerous, she wouldn't have died. I'm not blaming her. I'm just saying kind of there is some responsibility there. MJ, we're talking Zendaya, now in Tom's trilogy, it just felt a little forced. Like, first movie, they barely talked. She was kind of, like, always just kind of watching him weirdly. Second movie, suddenly he's, like, randomly in love with her. They, like, start dating, and then there's, like, a weird time hop in No Way Home, and suddenly they're like, I love you, and they're, like, professing their love for one another, and it just seemed like I didn't get the slow burn, and it was, like, too much payoff without enough build-up. So I say all that to say, I have things that I don't love about all three of the female protagonists, but I think Gwen is the best of the three because she is the most intelligent. Well, I don't want to say that. She and MJ are the most intelligent, but I think she and Andrew have the best chemistry, and that will set her above Zendaya's MJ, in my opinion, if we're ranking the female counterparts.
Yes, okay, so I see Taylor and I are agreeing again. I just thought, yes, Andrew's Gwen Stacy, to me, is the best love interest, kind of similar to the points that Taylor touched on. She's a brilliant student. She gets that job in England. She's an intern at Oscorp, and she just seems very motivated, driven, and fearless. And it seems like if, Spider-Man Peter Parker weren't in her life, she would be successful, she'd move on, like, she's her own person.
Exactly.
And it kind of seems like in Tobey's Spider-Man, like you said, she's kind of just used as a way to heighten tension in the film, right? And then it seems like she goes to Harry in a moment of need, and it just seems like she bounces around and doesn't really have an entirely positive impact on Peter Parker's life. It always seems like she's the reason why there's stress and anxiety in his life. With MJ, I feel like it's more of what I'm talking about. She's brilliant. She's like this nerdy girl. As you know, when she helps the team win at was it a decathlon?
Yeah.
Is that the right word?
Mm-hmm.
So she would be my second. So if I had to rank them, I would say Andrew's Gwen Stacy, Tom's MJ, Tobey's MJ. But at the end of the day, it just kind of, like, I agree with you, Taylor, it just seemed weird, because she was just kind of like this social outcast in the first movie, and then all of a sudden, like, she's in with the friend group, she's BFFs with everybody, and it kind of seemed like the turning factor for her was, like, in the hotel room in Far From Home, where she sees Tom's abs and is like, wait a minute, maybe I am really attracted to this guy.
I mean, who wouldn't be, though? Like, come on.
Well, we know how Taylor feels about Tom Holland,
That's fair.
so I don't think we need to elaborate on that. So, at the end of the day, you know, Andrew's Gwen, I feel like, helps Spider-Man Peter Parker out the most. Not that Tom's MJ is completely helpless, but it seems like, you know, Gwen has the resources at Oscorp to help with a bunch of different things that Andrew's Peter Parker had going on. So I would say Andrew's Gwen Stacy is the best love interest.
Okay, and that's the correct answer, because I'm going to tell you, Gwen is 100% hands down the best love interest for various reasons. I think that a lot of them have been named so far. And I mean, honestly, if we had to talk about real chemistry, they're the only two who had it, in my opinion. Especially on screen, most specifically. They're the only two that I sat there and I was like, this is a relationship. They're really into each other. Like, you could just see it. Like, even in the first movie, like, you could just tell they're, like, giddy with each other. Like, it's that little, like, beginning of a love and everything. And to Taylor's point, why she kind of fights against Gwen is because Gwen kind of got herself killed. If you watched the movie, which I know you did, she blatantly goes on about how it's her choice to help him. And I stand by that for the day. And I know you want to argue with me and don't say anything. It is my turn to defend Gwen.
Whether or not it's her choice, it's still, I mean, yes, it was her choice and she made a choice, but that choice directly resulted in her being killed.
Which is fair, but
you can't argue
dock
that.
her
That's all I'm saying.
because she wanted to help the person that she loves.
I guess my thought is just, I don't know.
Exactly.
I don't know how to explain
I
it.
won. Okay, so moving forward with
I'm
that.
just saying, whatever, it's
moving
fine.
forward with that.
We all agreed. That's what matters.
I know, you wouldn't be able to tell by the way she's, like, coming at
Because
me.
you can't do that. And also, to be fair, up until that point, Andrew was, and we have to use all first names, obviously, because they're all Peter, but Andrew was always there and was always going to protect her, and unfortunately, just in that moment, he wasn't able to. But similarly to most of Taylor's thoughts, Mary Jane and Toby's annoyed the heck out of me. Like, I remember watching these films, didn't remember her being as annoying as I found her to be, but I forget which one of you said it, Davis might have pointed this out, she was like a hindrance the whole time. Like, you could have just removed her character, and I think we would have been fine. We really didn't need her, but she just was constantly just the person getting in the way, and I just, like I said, annoyed, was really not here for her. And then my issue with MJ, I think Taylor was saying a lot of this, and this is Tom's MJ, she was almost like, I don't know if you guys all have seen that meme of, like, when they're always talking about shows and they're like, the first 2 seasons and the horse is really nicely drawn and then the last season's like this really terrible sketch. But if you've seen that meme, it's like the opposite with MJ, where it was like, the first movie, she was so poorly written. The second movie, they were like trying to get better so it looked a little nicer. And by the third one, they were like, here's a beautiful head of a stallion. Like, they finally figured out how to write her in the third one. And I didn't think she made sense in the first one. She was just there for 7 lines. The second one, Tom, to Taylor's point, randomly was in love with her, came out of left field, don't know where it came from, and they all of a sudden loved each other, and were so into each other. And then by the third one, I was like, okay, I can get behind this, but I still wasn't like, I was like, they could have just remained friends. They really didn't have me like, I love their relationship. So,
Well, not to mention that whole relationship, and this is more a criticism of the movie than it is the character, but it completely sidelined Ned,
Yes.
who'd been there from the beginning, which, again, not her character's fault necessarily, but I did not necessarily agree with that choice because he'd kind of been there from the beginning.
Well, and it also was off-putting because it's they were together for maybe 5 months, if that, and they're college together. We can all live together. And they even make a whole joke about I know at one point Tom grabs MJ's hand when they're talking about college, and Ned you just see his hand come out and go on top. And I know it's supposed to be the whole third wheel joke, but I really was what? And then even at the end, they make his goodbye to MJ so much more emotional than his goodbye to Ned, who's been his best friend for at least 3 or 4 years since freshman year, possibly longer. So I just didn't sit right with me. It kind of put a bad taste in my mouth. So for best love interest, hands down, I can't even debate it that it has to go to Gwen. I just think there's too many complaints about the other two, in my opinion.
Fair.
I think that's very well said.
All right, so next one. And now this one, I'm not sure what anyone... Some of the ones I can guess what the answer's going to be, and some of them I can't. So this one I'm not sure. Who's the best Aunt May?
Okay, so this one I went back and forth, and I have 2 answers, because I think there's 2 interpretations to this question. So the first, I think best overall Aunt May, I have to go with Andrews. I believe, I'm 99% sure it's Sally Field. I don't know why I'm blanking on her name, the actress's name, but she's in Forrest Gump. She's an amazing actress, really good. And I think the scene that sets her apart for me is in TASM 2 when she finds the board that he did in his room where he's looking for his parents and all, not looking for his parents, but trying to discern the mystery around them and understand what exactly happened to them and led to their deaths. And she's so upset, I raised you, and she talks about what he means to her and how he's truly her son because she raised him from the time he was 6. And I think obviously Toby's Aunt May loves him, that comes across, but I think this is one of the only times, because obviously Marissa Tomei loves Tom as well, but this was really a powerful scene, and I think I don't really see that as much with the other 2, or at least they didn't stick out to me, I think, as much as that particular scene did. However, with that being said, I believe that Marissa Tomei, who plays Tom's Aunt May, is the most important Aunt May of the 3 of them because she, in essence, functions as Uncle Ben and that motivator for Tom, and in fact says the great responsibility line, which in the other 2 franchises is Uncle Ben's role. So I think in terms of importance, you can't go anywhere but Tom's Aunt May because she functions in that kind of motivator and moral compass role.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you there, because Tom's Aunt May, I feel is more of a best friend. Andrew's Aunt May is more of a mother. And then Toby's Aunt May is more of a grandma. That's kind of the way I looked at it. So obviously, your friend is going to behave and act differently and give you different advice than your mom, than your grandma, So for me, if I had to pick a best Aunt May, I would say Toby's. In my opinion, Toby's Aunt May is the best, strictly because I think her Aunt May has some of the best lines in the movies as far as motivation and wisdom. I mean, granted, she is way older than Tom's Aunt May, so she's lived longer. But especially, I wrote 2 lines down in my notes that I think really kind of nail the point down. Because at one point, I think it's in the second Spider-Man, she says, "I believe there's a hero in all of us that keeps us honest, gives us strength, makes us noble, and finally gets us to die with pride, even though sometimes we have to be steady and give up the thing we want most, even our dreams." And I think that line specifically from Toby's Aunt May is really what kind of drives him throughout the 3 movies, because he realizes in order to be Peter Parker, he has to give up Spider-Man. In order to be Spider-Man, he has to give up, MJ and Gwen, all his Peter Parker-ness. So one way or the other, he has to give up on one thing in order to be steady with another. And so I think that line really resonates with him well. And I think the other line that was really had an impact on me, at least. So I watched, obviously, the Tobey Maguire movies a long time ago. They were a big part of my childhood, but I did need to rewatch them not only for No Way Home, but also for this podcast. So when I was rewatching them, this line is when I think Tobey's Andrew says basically like, you know, Uncle Ben's killer died last night, talking about Flint Marko. And Tobey's like, he deserved it, didn't he? And Aunt May said, I don't think it's for us to say whether a person deserves to live or die. And then Peter says, Aunt May, he killed Uncle Ben. And then she says, Uncle Ben meant the world to us, but he wouldn't want us living 1 second with revenge in our hearts. And I think that's also a line that really hits Tobey's Peter Parker hard and comes full circle in No Way Home, where Tom's rage-filled with revenge, and he goes to stab the Green Goblin with his glider, and then Tobey comes in and stops him. And when I saw that in the theaters, it triggered the line from the movie where he's like, it's not for us to say whether a person deserves to live or die. And I think that was Tobey's motivating factor to come in and stop the glider from stabbing the Green Goblin. So I think overall, best Aunt May would be Tobey's, just because she's got some really great quotes from the movies, and I think she's the one out of the three that really motivates Peter the most.
That's not what I expected you to say, so I'm actually I'm reeling from that, but gathering my thoughts. So for me, I have like the dumb answer and I have the intellectual answer. And the dumb answer is growing up, seeing what my aunts and uncles look like. Andrews just fit the right age. And that is why I always just like really bonded to that Aunt May, because I was like, yeah, you know, my aunts and uncles, granted, my aunts and uncles vary across many ages because we have a very large family on one side, but I'm like, yeah, okay, my aunts and uncles, I could see this. I just thought Tobey's was too old, and I thought Tom's was too young. But to Taylor's point, I think I would have to be going with Andrews, just because I think Andrews' trilogy, or not trilogy, but maybe one day, Andrews' films, I think bring in an aspect that we don't see with the other two, which is the parental aspect, in the form of, it even talks about his parents. I mean, one of his bigger motivators are his parents and understanding what happened to them. So it brings more depth, I think, to Aunt May and the story. I think Tobey's gets glossed over. He just lives with his aunt and uncle, and then just aunt. And then for Tom, I think the same thing kind of happens. It's really not delved into the way it is with Andrew, so I think it really highlights the pressure that was put on her to raise him and to raise him into a good person. So she's definitely, I would have to say, the best in my opinion. I also think Tom's is put on a different spectrum. So I really think you're only comparing Tobey's and Andrews with this question, because Tom's is a different spectrum by playing that Aunt Ben part, or Aunt Ben. Well, sure, we could do that.
Yeah, I mean, that works.
That Uncle Ben part, she's kind of putting it in her own wheelhouse, if you will, just because she is playing such a different thing. And also, she's the only one who knew he was Spider-Man, so that's a very different aspect to the character.
Well, who obviously knew.
Yeah.
In my opinion, Tobey's Aunt May also knew, and I don't know so much about Andrew's, it wasn't as obvious, but Tobey's, I'm like 99% sure she knew.
He washed the American flag, remember? So it's... But no, I just think she's almost on her own thing, that you can't even really compare her with the other two, with just at least we know that she knew about Spider-Man. So I think that's just a very different thing. So I have to go with Andrews as well. This next question should be interesting. But who's had the best villains? And this is out of all of their films. Tom's we can take out number 3, just for clarifying, I think, because I think that's fair, since the villains in that film came from the other two anyway.
Okay, so I think for me, in terms of villains, there is no other answer than Tobey. I think across the board he had the most iconic villains. You're talking Green Goblin, Doc Ock, and Venom, who is played as a straight villain in Tobey's trilogy, or in Spider-Man 3, really, which we know Venom kind of blurs the lines a little bit more now in his current iteration, but again, still one of Spider-Man's more iconic foes. So I think Tobey had the benefit of having some of the, more popular villains, the ones that really get people excited. I will say, though, one villain that I don't think I understood how much I enjoyed, even though I saw this movie twice in theaters, was Mysterio. Even though in Far From Home, he's not, the magical Mysterio that he is in the comics. Even though he's using, drones and stuff, I still thought he was really cool. And I really liked the scenes in which he's using the illusions on Peter, especially right before Peter gets hit by the train in Berlin. Like that whole series of scenes, I think is just like really cool and just so well done and really visually very interesting. So, I mean, I have to go Tobey overall, but I do want to give like a specific shout out to Tom's Mysterio because I think he's really up there as well.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you. I think Tobey has the best villains. And I think just overall, these discussions are difficult because I think Tobey's Peter Parker and Spider-Man carries a huge amount of nostalgia for all three of us.
For sure.
So I think it's sometimes hard because, Tobey was the OG Spider-Man. He's the Spider-Man we grew up watching and loving and knowing. So I think I don't know why I felt the need to say that, but I feel like it's hard sometimes because everything from our childhood we want to latch onto. But I do agree with you. I think out of the three, if you think about the superhero genre in general, but also just movies in general, action movies, all the villains are typically, if not probably the second main character in the movies. So I think that really comes out in Tobey's movies where, like you said, Doc Ock, Green Goblin, Venom, Sandman, and I guess James Franco's Goblin, which I guess we can kind of just ignore. I don't think he really was that have an impact. But all of Tobey's villains felt like they were the secondary character in the films, whereas in Tom's and Andrew's, yes, the villains were off doing their own thing, but in my mind, in Tom's movie, Aunt May, Ned, MJ, and, his classmates, the teachers, they were all I kind of grouped them together and say they were the secondary character, and then the villains were the third. And I think, like you said, I think I agree with you, Taylor. I think Mysterio, Quentin Beck was by far the best Tom villain. I like Michael Keaton. I wasn't really a big fan of his Vulture. I just didn't really, there wasn't a huge motivation, and I didn't really feel a ton of stress when he was, flying around. But with Tobey, with Doc Ock, and the Green Goblin, I remember as a kid, I was scared to death of the Green Goblin. He freaked me out. But I just think my favorite villain out of all the Spider-Man movies is definitely Doc Ock, because I just think his arc as a villain, as a hero to a villain to back to a hero again in No Way Home, I really liked how he redeemed himself in the third Tom movie. I just think, I don't think we can really pin this on Andrew Garfield, but I think his movies were just not very well written. I think they could have been done better. Just the villains to me in Andrew's universes were just kind of forgettable, what's his name? Paul Giamatti playing the Rhino. I don't know. I feel like they just they weren't iconic like Tobey's villains are. So that's why I think I would have to say that Tobey has the best villains, because they feel like the secondary main character, whereas the other movies, they just kind of feel like third or fourth.
Yeah, okay, so I think Davis said a lot that I have to agree with. Starting with, I think Tobey gets the benefit of being the first, so he had the best pick of villains, because he had all the possibilities. So he was lucky enough to have, I would say, probably three of the most iconic villains, which are Doc Ock, Green Goblin, and Venom. I think he just has the benefit since he literally was uncontested at the time, both as other Spider-Men and other heroes in general. So he was lucky to be that OG and came out with those heroes, and I think, or those villains, and I think since then they were desperately trying to avoid redoing them. But I would give it to Tobey, but if we had to rank them, I'd actually rank them in the order they came out, so Tobey's, Andrew's, and Tom's, and for me, it's because I really look at a villain, and I like what David was saying about how they should be that secondary character to the first. But I also, my thing is, I think in that case, yes, that would be Tobey than Tom. But my way of ranking villains is by motivation, and I think Tobey's had the strongest motivations. I like that you really got to see them all morph into their villains, which is something we see in Andrews, and I think that gets glossed over. Versus Tom's, you don't see it. They're just already villains. They're already the bad guy. Sorry, I've always been a killer of watching the villain come about and how they're born into who they are. So we really see that with Tobey's. Love it. With Andrew's, I think they both have really interesting motivations, and I think, to another point Davis made, those films were not very well written, and I think had they been, first off, Andrew as Spider-Man, I mean, we've seen what he can do in No Way Home, so I think had he been given a better script, his movies would have fared better, but also his villains. I think they had great motivation for being villains. I mean, one was an amputee just trying to grow his arm back using science. The other one just wanted to be seen by people and remembered. He wanted to be someone people noticed. So I think they had these really deep kind of drives within them, and I think they were like a different level of motivation. So I have to put those second. I just think had they been written better, I think I would even be saying they'd be first if they were written better. It just didn't come across as well. And then, like I said, Tom's for me, I mean, I think now he got even worse pick of the litter because he was the third one. There'd been 5 villains before him or before his movies. And then it's like, to Davis's point, wasn't loving the Vulture the way it was. He didn't really feel evil. And maybe that was the point, but also that it didn't make me feel very like, oh, superhero movie. Like, I just kind of was like, he's just cleaning up after the Avengers, trying to keep his business in order. And then with, Quentin Beck, I think had they done Mysterio the way Mysterio is in the comics, I would be giving him like a gold star. However, him being mad because Mr. Stark named his technology Barf doesn't really like get me feeling that, oh, what a villain kind of thing. He was definitely evil, definitely a bad dude, but like wasn't like, oh yeah, cool. So yeah, that would be my ordering for those. So I agreed with both of you in different contexts. So moving into one of the last semi-easier questions before we reach the 3 hardest ones out there is, who is the best friend? And I think this is an easy one.
Yeah, I mean, I have to go with Ned. He's the only best friend who doesn't stab them in the back or cause the death of his girlfriend. So by default, Ned wins. But also I think, he actively helps Peter. He's not upset when he finds out the truth. He genuinely supports him. So just even from like a checks all the boxes of a good friend, I think he does that. I really like his character. I think he's hilarious. He's just different from both versions of Harry. I think Andrew is very alone in the first movie, and then his second movie, Harry just kind of comes in, and like they're supposed to be these like long lost friends, and it was just like kind of random and weird because they were like, oh my god, we forgot to write in Harry Osborn, like what? And then in Tobey's, he actively goes against him. He knows that Tobey's Peter is in love with MJ and he goes for her anyway, like even when they were still friends, like regardless of anything that was going to happen later. Like that's a major stab in the back. I'm sorry, but there's like bro code, same as there's like girl code. Like if your friend likes someone, you just don't go for them. Like, I'm sorry. So I think even just overall as a friend, Ned is better and funnier and not as dark as the other two, which I enjoyed also.
I have a feeling we're all going to choose Ned. I feel like that's the way the discussion is heading. I think Taylor makes a lot of good points in that he checks off all the boxes of a good best friend. He's helpful, he's kind, he's compassionate, he's there for Peter Parker, and he doesn't want to kill him ever in the movies. Not yet. I mean, we don't have to delve into fan theories, but I've been reading online or seeing some tweets that they want Ned's character to become the new Tom trilogy's Hobgoblin.
And we've been speaking about that on this podcast.
We have. Yes,
I am a big advocate for that.
So, yeah. And I just think in each of the... Okay, we're going to totally remove Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man because, like, his best friend, like Taylor says, comes in awkwardly halfway through the second movie. And it's like, I was away at boarding school. And it's just like, there's no chemistry whatsoever between them. I genuinely didn't feel like they were friends at all. And the only thing that was telling me they were was the writing, which happened to not be great. I mean, don't get me wrong. I enjoyed the Amazing Spider-Man movies. I just think they could have been better written. And hopefully if they do make a third movie, as the fans on Twitter are using the hashtag, I forget what the hashtag was, but they're using a hashtag to want to kind of advocate for Andrew's third
Me on my private
Spider-Man
account
movie.
every day.
I won't let her do it on the show
No,
account.
so I
Like,
get pushed to my
favoritism.
private account, but it's okay.
Out of her 5 burner accounts on Twitter. So yeah, I don't think Andrew has a best friend, so that kind of takes him out of contention. Tobey's with James Franco. I think Harry Osborn does support him, at least in the first movie. In high school, he kind of sticks up for him, and that's kind of a thing that comes back to haunt Tobey, or a fun line. One of my favorite lines from the third Spider-Man movie, where they're fighting towards the end of the film, and Harry's like, I protected you in high school, now I'm gonna kick your ass. Then Tobey does that ooh line that like is so memed
good.
online. I'm gonna put some dirt in your eye. I don't know if that's the same scene, but anyway, so I think Tobey's, Harry Osborn definitely is a good friend to him, at least in the first
With
movie.
the exception of
but
stealing
then
the girl
kinda
he
steals
likes. That was in the first movie.
Right, yeah, I was just getting to that. Like, he steals his girl, and there's the 2 lines where, he tells Toby's Peter in the coffee shop, and then Peter walks out, and he turns around and looks back in the coffee shop, and Harry does that snide little look over the shoulder and wink at him, and I'm like, come on, man. So, like, that line, I'm like, all right, you're not really that great of a friend if you're going to steal his girl. Like you guys said, bro code.
But that was in the third movie, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I think the 2 lines, that comes from the third movie, and then he says that line where he's like, and when she kissed me, like, how it was kissing me as kids, strawberry, whatever, like wearing the strawberry lip, it's just such a rude, like,
it was like a big dig in the 2000s, like in the early 2000s.
Yes.
Like, in that time period, everyone was like...
And it's just like, the lip gloss is
yeah,
popping,
and they were like,
it's strawberry.
dang, he went after the lip gloss, like...
Yeah, so I think that's, like, to conclude, like, I think Ned is my favorite just because he's, as Ned always claims, the guy in the chair. He's always helping out Peter. He's very helpful, friendly, kind, and isn't a backstabber, so that's why Ned's the best.
No surprise, I'm going to choose Ned as well. For me, I just think, once again, this kind of boils down to, like, the chemistry. They're the only 2 that I thought had real friendship chemistry. To pick off Andrews real quick, to Davis's point, and I have actually heard, I think the director, or someone, I forget who it was, but someone told the director essentially, like, you need to include the goblin in this film, so they had to write in Harry and the story of the goblin. So he wasn't even supposed to be in it, which would have helped. So yeah, it was
that movie was so busy.
Yeah, but it was the same issue that hit the third Tobey one as well. So they were pushing too much to have a different narrative than where I think it was the director and the writers were trying to put it. So there wasn't a chemistry. He just was randomly there. Like, it felt weird. I think he solely was brought in so they could be like, now kill Gwen. I really do. So it was weird.
And to set up the Sinister Six, which never happened.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, Oscorp themselves was a big enough villain in that film. Like, they didn't need to make Harry, like, it was weird. In the first one, I'm gonna say it in the form that 20 years ago, I have to praise James Franco for his Harry in general, because I also think, like, the casting with him and Willem Dafoe was, like, uncanny. It was really great. But I also think he, for Harry, played Harry perfectly. I mean, at the end of the day, Harry does backstab Peter, he does become the Goblin, he takes after his father, like, so I think he played the part perfectly, but friendship-wise, sucked. And I think we can say that confidently. Mm-hmm. There was nothing good about him until, like, the last maybe 30 minutes of the third movie, when he came and, like, was like, I got you, man, and they fought together, and he died for a cause, so wasn't really there. Ned, on the other hand, was a great friend, always has been a great friend, and I truly believe, to stoke that rumor a little bit that Davis was speaking of, if Hobgoblin comes, I truly believe it's going to either be because he doesn't know Peter, or because he remembers Peter and is just angry that Peter never came back for him, which I think would be an actual villain origin story to me, more than just, like, my dad had weird gas, like, which is really... which, like, really is what it was, and you couldn't tell me otherwise. And then he was just like...
You should put that on a t-shirt.
My dad has gas.
It's like, no, honestly, it's like it's one of those explain the plot badly, and that's Spider-Man, the first Spider-Man right there. My dad has bad gas. Like, that is it. But I think I will. I'm trademarking that right now. That is going on a t-shirt.
Copyright.
Yeah.
Get the patent attorneys on the line.
But yeah, 100% Ned. I'm hoping if they don't pull him in to do Hobgoblin, they leave him to rest his character where he is and leave that friendship where it is, because I think that was the best representation of Peter having a real friend for quite a while to support him. But now we're going to move into the 3 hardest questions. First, and this is only the Spider-Man, but who is the best Spider-Man? Leaving out who they were as Peter Parker, anywhere else, who is, while in the suit, the best Spider-Man?
Okay, for me, I thought about this, and it really comes down to who is the most like Spider-Man in the comics. So I don't read a ton of comics, but the panels that I have seen with Spider-Man, he's sassy, he's funny, he's kind of quirky, he always has a little bit something to say. And for me, the person who brought that to life the most was Andrew. Katie's so excited that I said that. I thought, honestly, Tobey's was a little dry. Like, he had a few lines here and there that they peppered in that were a little humorous. But of the 3, he has the least amount of humor in the suit. He's very focused, and he wants to do a good job and save the city. And that's cool, and that has its own merit. But in terms of who Spider-Man is in the comics, that's a little bit of a departure. And then I think Tom also has it. I think where Tom kind of loses points for me is the argument that we've made, I think, a few times on this podcast, which is he's Tony Stark Spider-Man. He's not a Spider-Man independently and of himself. And I think we're going to see that moving forward and in, the trilogy that's coming up. But as of yet, he has not been a Spider-Man of his own making. So for me, he can't then win, even though he does have those great barbs. Like, I'm thinking about, when he grabs Bucky's hand in Civil War and he's like, whoa, cool, you have a metal arm. Like, that's so Spider-Man. But at the same time, like, you're fighting the Winter Soldier in a suit that Tony Stark made you. Like, that's not Spider-Man. So that's why, for me, I think Andrew has to take it.
Yeah, so I also agree. I also said that Andrew is the best Spider-Man. And I think the one thing that I agree with Taylor, and I'll elaborate on that a little bit, but the one thing that I really liked about, there's one moment that stands apart for me that makes Andrew the best Spider-Man, not Peter Parker, Spider-Man, is when he's fighting the lizard in the school, and he's webbing up the lizard, and he literally crawls like a spider around and around, wrapping up the lizard in a web. And I just thought, when I saw that, like, it's just like instantly spider. Like, it was such, like, he literally crawls like a spider around and wraps up, when a spider has like a fly in its web, he goes down and like wraps it up. And I feel like that was just such a cool moment to me. And I felt like that was like what helped me kind of sway me to say that he's the better Spider-Man. And I feel like my critique of Tom's is similar to Taylor's, where in the first movie, he's Iron Boy Jr., like, he's so reliant on Tony Stark. In the second one, he's reliant on Nick Fury. And then in the third one, he's reliant on Doctor Strange. And so I think that's why, we don't have to talk about it, but that's why I think us 3 are so excited about the new Tom trilogy, is that he's finally, like, he has no support system whatsoever. But in Tom's, I feel like his Spider-Man is always getting bailed out by, Tony, always getting bailed out by Stephen Strange. Like, he's always getting bailed out and helped by other Avengers or other Avenger tech. And so I think, if you had to boil it down to, like, for me, and I guess I got to talk about Tobey in a little bit, but Tobey's Spider-Man, like you said, Taylor, he does have some great classic one-liners, but to me, he kind of has the same, I don't think this is a word, but quipability as, say, Ant-Man or Star-Lord, where they're nonstop throwing out jokes and quips and stuff. Like, he has, like, a couple of those lines throughout the trilogy, but to me, Andrew is always just, I guess it kind of seems like he has ADHD, where he's always talking and throwing out one-liners, and he's always doing this sense of humor, especially in the scene where he's fighting the Rhino, where he's whistling his theme song, while simultaneously webbing up the Rhino, pulling his pants down, having the gun come hit him on the head. But the biggest thing that sets apart the three Spider-Men, in my opinion, I think Andrew has the best web swinging scenes out of all the movies. The slow-mos, they're so beautifully shot. With Andrew's Spider-Man, we get POVs, which I thought was really cool. So it's like some scenes where like you just see the hands come out, and it's like, holy cow, like I'm Spider-Man now. I just think his web swinging scenes are great. I think they're the best out of the three movies. There's always that fun joke, and I forget which Tobey Maguire movie it is, but one of the web swinging scenes, it literally is a mannequin, and it's so obvious that it's like a mannequin, and Kristen Dunst is like holding on to it. But I think, like I said, the one factor that makes me say Andrews as Spider-Man is not only the spider like when he's webbing up the lizard, but just when he's swinging through New York City. It's such a special, unique moment that sets his Spider-Man apart from the others. Yes, the others have web swinging through New York, but when Andrews is, you just feel like you are Spider-Man. You are swinging through New York, and I think that's really cool. So that's why I think Andrew is the best Spider-Man.
Okay, so this doesn't really come as a surprise, but I'm gonna say Andrew as well, and I'm gonna go off on about a 5-minute tangent on a fangirl thing, but first off, for me, the reason I choose Andrew is a lot of what you guys have both been saying, just like the jokes, like, as you guys were both going on about it, my only thought that I could really think of, and I know there's so many, but all that was going through my head was when he's sitting there with one of the, like, very early in his first movie, I think he just donned the suit the first time, and he has that one burglar in the car. He was gonna take the car, and the burglar pulls out a knife, and he's like, "Oh no, my only weakness, small knives." I just, like, every time, and I can picture it so well. I just think he had the best humor about it. He just, I don't know, he embodied the character very well as Spider-Man. To Davis's point as well, the swinging around the city, I mean, it just was so different with Andrew, and I really liked how he did it. I also, and I fangirl about this move a lot, he does that, like, little catapult thing where he takes his webs on both sides, pulls himself back, and shoots himself forward, and he does it all the time, and I love it. Like, I just think it's just brings a different aspect to him. So, I don't know, I've always endorsed him as Spider-Man. I think he's the best. For Tobey, I just think he's a little awkward. I think he looks great in the suit. Like, I don't think there's an awkwardness in the suit. I just feel like, I know people make a lot of memes about him just kind of, like, standing there. and it's kind of valid. He's just a very awkward person. I think that's the point of his character, is they're trying to, but, like, the whole idea with the Peter Parker and the Spider-Man kind of, like, two identities things is that they're kind of supposed to be two different people, but also not at the same time. And so it's like, Peter's supposed to be kind of awkward, not super cool, and Spider-Man's supposed to be, like, that different persona he can put on, so I feel like Tobey just didn't quite get there. And Taylor kind of skimmed this idea a little bit with Tom's, but yes, Iron Man, or Iron Boy Jr., or Iron Man Jr., or Iron Boy, whatever you want to call him, that was a big issue, but also, and I know I said this very early into my rewatch with those as well, I said, the maturity issue for me is just, like, there is not a lot of maturity with Tom's. And I know it's supposed to be the whole he's supposed to be able to grow, but I think to that ferry scene where he's holding the ferry together as a call to Tobey's when he's trying to stop the subway. And if Iron Man wasn't around, so in Tobey's or Andrew's universes where they don't have the Avengers, those people would have died.
Yep.
And it's not really talked about enough that, like, his choices are quite literally, like, putting people in more danger than what they're in initially. Even down to, like, in Far From Home, I mean, Mr. Stark left him these amazing glasses, and I get it, like, the whole thing was, oh, he was being manipulated, but I'm like, who also let Mr. Stark just leave him these pretty much, like, and I think that was an argument in the film, like, these should have been locked away or given to, like, the defense.
Given to the DOD. Yeah.
And they're just given to a 16, 17-year-old boy, and it's like, okay, and he gives them away to a man he knew for maybe a week? Like, I just, there's a maturity issue, and I think that's obviously changing. I think that changed a lot in No Way Home already, and I think we're going to see that change in the new trilogy, but for Spider-Man, I mean, he's supposed to be a hero. I just didn't feel it there. I just felt like he either was being babysat or he was just making horrendous choices. And honestly, my last thing for Andrews was just like, obviously Deadpool and Spider-Man in the comics are huge together. He'd be the Spider-Man I'd see with Deadpool, kind of thing. Like, if you wanted to bring those two characters, that would be Andrew's version.
Tom's is too innocent for Deadpool.
Yeah.
At least at this stage.
Yeah.
Like, I could not see that happening. And I know it's going to happen, so I hope it happens well. But to your point, I think Andrew's a much better fit there.
Yeah.
Personality-wise as Spider-Man.
I think the one thing that really puts Tom at the bottom of the list is not only he gets help from everybody, but also, too, his motivations, at least in the first two films, are, I want to be an Avenger, I want to be a superhero, I want to prove myself. And, like, that's really, all of the actions in those first two movies are wanting to prove himself and wanting to be an Avenger, not really for the well-being of New Yorkers. And I feel like, mostly with Tobey's, but also with Andrew's, is that the motivating factor is, like, they want to protect their city, they want to protect the ones that they love, whereas Tom's out here just trying to prove himself, which I think is also a big reason why, and I think why I just don't like Tom's that much. Like, kind of what to your point was, is like, it just seems like he's just a kid. He's not really Spider-Man. There's not really a clear distinction between Peter Parker and Spider-Man. They're both kind of the same awkward, nerdy, sometimes whiny kids, so I think that's why I was put Tom at the bottom.
Yeah, no, I agree. Alright, so now to go on the flip side of that coin, who's the best Peter Parker?
This one is really hard, actually. I have been changing my mind because I knew this was next, so I've been thinking about it, and I was thinking about it earlier, and I keep going back and forth between Andrew and Tobey. I think they both have pluses and they both have minuses. So, Tobey, I think one of the things that I really like about him is they show more of Peter Parker's life, I guess. So you see him in college, you see him doing all that stuff that like a normal person would do. He spends, more time at the Bugle. He actually is, a freelancer there. So you get kind of that element of Peter Parker as well, which is obviously very rooted in the comics. However, one aspect that I didn't like was he almost comes across as like, and I know it's because he's Spider-Man, but he comes across almost as like lazy in a sense. Like even when he's talking to Dr. Octopus and they're having that conversation, he's like, just because you're brilliant doesn't mean you don't have to work hard and put in the effort. And I thought that was interesting. Like even too in the first movie, like when he goes to do that wrestling thing, like he's just trying to make quick cash. So like there's an element there of like just trying to like get rich quick or do it quickly or, taking the easy way out, which I don't really know that I associate with Peter Parker. With Andrews, I think I like that he has the brilliance. Like you can so clearly see how intelligent Peter Parker is in the way that he's portrayed as Andrews, which is something that I think gets glossed over a lot. Because if you think about it, like Peter Parker makes it on lists of like most intelligent people in the MCU. He's in the top 5 in almost every conversation, right? And I think it's easy to get that lost in a lot of these movies, but I think Andrew does a good job, or Andrew's 2 movies do a good job of like really showing Peter Parker and how intelligent and how smart he is. And I think for Tom, one of the things that I do think he gets points for in my book is that he is younger. So I do like, Peter Parker does start out as a younger person in the comics, and I think it is harder to look at Andrew and Tobey as like young teenagers.
Although
they're not as relatable.
I also kind of disagree with that, only on the sense of maybe Tobey's a little, but Andrew, everyone's always like, he's too old. But honestly, when I was watching it, I was like, especially the first one, I was like, no, that's the, like, if I saw him walk around and you told me he was a senior in high school, I'd be like, yeah, that's about right.
Well, I guess to clarify, we see Peter as a sophomore.
That's fair.
I kind of like that, like, Tom does look like, a 15, 16-year-old kid. I mean, he was only, 19 or 20 when he was filming this, so he was actually very close age-wise, and Tom does kind of have a baby face, so it works. So I do think he gets points there, but I think, Davis, you alluded to this earlier, he's a little whiny, which maybe, in some ways that works because he is younger than the other two. And I think it is less pronounced in No Way Home because he is maturing, but there is a little bit of whininess in the first two movies where he's like, woe is me, MJ doesn't like me, and I just want to be on vacation, and why do I have to do this, and why is my girlfriend's dad a supervillain? Like, why is this happening to me?
Yeah.
Whereas, like, the other two guys are like, man, this sucks, time to go back to work.
Yeah.
I say all that to say, I think, and this is shocking to me because I was not expecting to come to this answer, but I think Andrew has to take it because I honestly can't remember what my negative was or like what my detractor was for him, whereas I have like clear and pronounced detractors, I think, from the other two.
Okay.
A win for the Andrew column.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with all of your points. To me, having rewatched them, it's hard for me to see, you know, Tobey as a high schooler. I mean, it's also in the time they were filming, but it's like these are grown adults pretending to be high schoolers, so I feel like that detracts a little bit. Because, like, I guess back then there's probably certain child labor laws that for filming or whatever, but I agree with all your points, Taylor. I feel like, you know, you spend more time as Peter Parker than as Spider-Man in those movies. So I see to that point. But to me, like, I feel like Peter Parker and Spider-Man have to be kind of one in the same. Whereas, I don't know exactly where this point that I'm making is going. But to me, I would say Tom is the best Peter Parker, just because I think he's the most relatable out of all the three. And I think, especially with the character of Spider-Man, yes, he's adored by people of all ages. But I feel like Spider-Man and just maybe the superhero genre in general is geared more towards teens, kids, and young adults. Like, I don't think my parents care at all about Spider-Man, you know? So I think Tom's is the most relatable because he goes through the true teenager experiences, whether that's having a crush, whether that's puberty. We feel like we're growing with Tom. And I feel like Tom's growth as Peter Parker is the most pronounced through the three movies. Because in the beginning, like, he's the whiny, hormonal teen who has a crush on Liz and doesn't see, you know, MJ, who's the one who truly loves him. And, like, that happens all the time. I'm sure we have stories that I feel like us three, we can relate more to Tom's Peter Parker than the other two. And I think for me, that's what sets him apart. Because he does have those they're nerds. They're really nerdy kids, and I feel like Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker is kind of the shy, emo, almost goth kind of sad kid who's always sad and mopey.
I mean, to be fair, he's an orphan.
And Tobey's is kind. He's also out of the goofiness, nerdiness scale. I think it would be Tom, Tobey, Andrew. But for me, like, Tobey's was always not really believable as I don't know. I just didn't like his portrayal as much. So I think it boils down to Tom's is the most relatable and I think has the best character arc as Peter Parker.
Okay. So I have no distinct answer, and maybe after I ramble a little bit, I'll get one. Because I think, and this is kind of almost a counterpoint to one of the things you just said, Davis, is keep in mind, okay, when was the first Spider-Man? 2002, right? Then the first Andrews was 2012, and then the first Peters was technically Civil War 2016, and then Spider-Man was not far after. But that's, 10, and then about 4 or 5 years in between. So, like, each one has a very different iteration on what I think we consider quote-unquote nerdy. And I think for Tobey's, it's like, they tried really hard to make him like this really like bottom of dirt shoe. Like, I think in the early 2000s, being a nerd was like the most frowned upon thing ever. It was like, oh my god, you're smart? That's disgusting. You're bullied. Like, instant, like, not cool kind of token. I think moving into the 2010s was that age of like, the nerds are kind of coming back and they're kind of cool and like, they are like, they don't quite fit in, and maybe they're not fully nerds anymore. They're kind of morphed into other types of people too. So it's like, yeah, they're really smart, but like Andrews, for example, was a mega skater boy, like out there skating his little skateboard around, like. But he's an outcast. Like he didn't. Yeah, And he didn't fit in with his group still, because he just was like, there. He was still quiet. He still was out, like, not so much like a prominent person. Now, I think now to 2017, I mean, heck, I was in high school in 2017. I was a sophomore going into junior year in 2017. So if anyone can really relate, it's me. And for Tom, for me, it's just like, he's now the biggest embodiment of the present day quote unquote nerd, where he's not really bullied for it anymore. And it's not really that like, oh, that's a really defining thing for him. So I think like, because they're all so different as Peters, because of the time in which they were in high school and because of like what defined them, I think it's hard to pick a Peter Parker. So if I had to just pick off of my favorite, I don't know. I kind of just want to say Andrew because I feel stressed. Because, like I said, I feel like Tobey was almost too, like, pushed down, that he just didn't come across really as, like, he was such a bland kind of character sometimes as Peter, and that's can be hard for me, but Tom is also kind of up and down, so I'm gonna go with Andrew to feel safe. But like I said, they're all ranked in very different parts, because I mean, you can't compare an early 2000s Peter Parker growing up in that time to someone who was almost in 2020 20 years later, So that one's a hard one.
I think going off of that, the only reason I would say, it was hard to choose Tom, because to be completely honest, I kind of switched my mind right as I started to talk, because I did think Andrew was the best Peter Parker, in the sense where the only reason why I might have chosen Andrew over Tom is because Andrew's Peter Parker is more resourceful than the other two Spider-Men. Like, Andrew's building web shooters out of watches and he's in that little lab, or I think it's like a shed, using batteries so he not only, has to be resourceful, but he also has to fine-tune his webbing in the second Spider-Man movie to better fight Electro. So I think his Peter Parker is, like, book smart, but I also think Andrew's Peter Parker is street smart as well. And so I think his resourcefulness puts him... you know what? Actually, I'm changing my mind. I'm saying I think Tom and Andrew are tied. I don't think I could choose, because I do like how inventive, and he's like a little, like, Andrew's like Peter's a little engineer. He's always crafty, and I also do like his pre-official suit look with the red ski mask, funny. The sunglasses,
and the beanie. It's the beanie that does it for me.
Yeah.
If all of us suddenly got powers, I have red articles of clothing in my closet, and then I would do the same thing. And so I think, to me, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man is more Peter Parker is more of a street smart skater boy, but yeah, Tom has the book for me.
Okay, so you actually just brought up an additional thing for me then, is I think I have to completely agree with the whole Andrew thing too, is like, I think he's the first time we see Peter Parker blatantly being smart, and I don't mean that in a weird way against Tobey, but I think like, it's just kind of randomly thrown in there, here and there. Oh, he's book smart. Like, it's like, oh, he's got, oh my gosh, what is that school? The Ivy League he's at. I literally said it earlier. Columbia. I was going to call it Columbus, and I was like, that is not right. But he's at Columbus. Oh, he answers that one really hard question or something. I guess it's hard. I don't really remember it. But, like, he's tutoring, like, all that. You can, like, inherently guess he's smart. You see it here and there. Even with Tom's. But I think Tom's is so downplayed until that one moment in Far From Home when he's rebuilding his suit. Like, you don't really see it. And then even in No Way Home, you finally see it with more of that, like, he used geometry to outsmart Doctor Strange. Like, there are those small moments where they're like, oh yeah, by the way, this kid's really smart. He's just always had everything else handed to him. And Andrews is like, no, he really built everything from the ground up. Like, and you see it, and you see him use it, and that's, I think, why I liked Gwen then, too. On top of that is, like, together, you saw how truly ingenious the two of them were of just figuring it all out using science. Like, it seems like the craziest thing, because I know we always have the science magic kind of debate, but, like, I just thought it was interesting to watch them, and, like, watch Andrew do everything he did, just using his brain and how smart he really is. So... I think we've come to the hardest question. I mean, hard for y'all maybe, and not for me, but overall, who is your favorite? Spider-Man and Peter Parker, overall, who was the best one played by either Tobey, Andrew, or Tom?
So, I feel like I should say one answer because my Spider-Man and my Peter Parker were the same, so naturally, my best overall should be the same guy that I said. But my heart wants to say Tom, so I'm very confused.
It's just because you're in love
I would
with
say
Tom
if
Holland.
I'm being objective and logical, it's gotta be Andrew, because I picked him as my top Spider-Man and my top Peter Parker, so naturally, if he has top scores in the two categories, he would have the natural top score overall. That's how math works.
That makes sense.
Yes, you know, occasionally I math correctly. So, logically...
Occasionally.
Yeah, I didn't say it was often. Logically, it's Andrew. But I think Tom does get an honorable mention because I love the MCU, and just by virtue of being in the MCU, it bumps him up. Honorable mention for Tobey also, I think just if we're talking about things that I love about Tobey, Davis, you talked about this a lot. He's the OG. He's my childhood.
Yep.
He's one of the reasons I loved Spider-Man growing up. I remember being obsessed with those movies when I was a kid. Like, that's something that neither one of the other two are ever going to be able to replicate, is like that experience and those feelings I had as a kid, because he was the first and he was the guy who kind of brought it all. So I guess I'm going to have to say Andrew, but there are definite merits to the other guys, and I love them both. So I don't ever want anybody to ever say that I was out here crapping on Spider-Man, because I love them all and they're all valid in their own way.
And also, is part of your, honorable mention to Tom's Peter Parker solely because of Tom Holland? I feel like you didn't mention that at all.
Look, I have a soft spot for the guy. Just let it be.
All right.
It is what it is.
To me, I'm not as logical as Taylor because
well, you admitted it.
if I look at my notes and based on who I picked for each of the sections, I think it is, I don't even know. Anyway, logically, based on who I've said previously, I'm just going to disregard that. To me, overall, I want to say Andrew Garfield, but to me, I don't think I can quite separate my nostalgia from my logic, so I'm going to have to say Tobey is my favorite Spider-Man.
Fair.
Strictly because I feel like I mean, I hate to say this about a Spider-Man movie, but I feel like the time we spend with Peter Parker as Peter Parker in the Tobey Maguire movies helps shape the movies more than in any of the other series, because he's a pizza delivery boy, but he uses Spider-Man to that advantage by swinging the pizzas to get it there on time for pizza time. But for me,
Fun fact,
least,
really quick, I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
Okay.
But I've been to that pizza parlor in New York. It's a real place, and I've been there. So
did you go there solely because of the movie?
No, I was in the area, and then it was a school program, and someone was like, "Oh my God, the Spider-Man thing is here," and they have a little thing on the wall and everything. So partially yes, but I also had to be there for a school event. I will have to take you both there. There's a little plaque on the wall, talks about how it was in Spider-Man. Hopefully it's still there. I haven't been there since COVID, so if COVID ruined that institution,
suck.
I'm just not gonna be okay.
That would stink.
Anyway, I'm sorry. Go on.
Yeah, no worries. I just think Tobey's is the best overall, because I think if you just want to get down to the nitty-gritty of film in general, your movie's only as good as your villains. And so to me, since I said Tobey's villains were my favorite, that's who I'm gonna have to go with, because to me, I think the villains made the movies, and in the other movies, I didn't feel that. So combining it felt like an purely authentic Spider-Man movies was Tobey's, because, he had the character, he had the New York, he had the villains. And to me, I just think Tom Holland's Spider-Man, we touched on this, he's always reliant on someone. Whether that's Tony, whether that's Stephen Strange, whether that's Nick Fury. It doesn't seem like he's capable of doing anything on his own. And I feel like a large part of Spidey's persona is that he's kind of the only one. He's the only Spider-Man. He's the only hero in New York City. And so, in The Amazing Spider-Man, we also get that with Andrew's Peter Parker. But to me, at least, I felt like Tobey Maguire was the best of both worlds. This probably is counterintuitive to what I said earlier and probably goes against what I've said in the past. But to me, those movies and Tobey Maguire's portrayal as Spider-Man, as Peter Parker, I feel like takes the cake, even though what winners in other categories previously. I feel like it's too hard for me to separate the nostalgia from the logic, and so that's why I'm gonna have to go with Tobey.
Well, I also just like your whole point about Spider-Man's kind of that lone guy, and he that's kind of his thing. I mean, they even bring that up in No Way Home, and they're like, "I've never worked as a team," and Tom's like, "I have." It's like, yeah, but
are you in a band?
Yeah, that was one of my favorites.
He was so excited for him too.
I know, he was like, "Oh my god, are you in a band?"
Andrew Garfield stole the show.
He did.
He was amazing.
But speaking of Andrew Garfield, I don't really think it surprises anybody, but
I think you picked him for every category.
I did not. I didn't pick him for best suit.
Oh.
Or villain. Or best friend. So
okay, but every one that was actually about Spider-Man or anything related to Spider-Man, like family-wise, you were like, okay. Yup, Andrew. So like nobody should be surprised.
Because first off, I need to make sure I'm established because I have been in love with Andrew Garfield Spider-Man since 2012. And
this is true. I can vouch for this. As her sister, she would not shut up about it.
Okay.
She is like an original TASM 3er people. You're talking to the OG, the real one.
I also wouldn't stop watching The Amazing Spider-Man 2 because we kept getting it for free on our TV, so I just watched it every time it was on.
Which, by the way, has a killer soundtrack. The Neighborhood is on there,
I forgot it was on it, so when
always a banger.
Dude, when I did my rewatch and I heard Honest come on, I was like, oh, I forgot. I'm like screaming in my apartment. My roommates are just staring at me, and I was just like, oh my god. But anyway, I don't think anyone should be surprised that I'm picking Andrew. Like I said, I have to just establish that I've been here, and I have to agree with everything everyone said about Andrew. I mean, we've already talked about, I picked him for Spider-Man and Peter Parker, of course, as well, but I also have to just say, like, for Davis's reason for picking Tobey, it's kind of my reason for picking Andrew. I think I've spoken about this before, but I'm 3 years younger than Taylor, so for me, 2012, I was only, 9?
You were 11. You were 11. No, you were born in 2001. In 2012, you were born in 2001. That's 11. You were about to fight me so hard.
Anyway, I was 11. But my point just being, Tobey's first movie came out and I was barely born. Like, I was, and then 2 years later, I was, 3? Like, all his movies were quite literally, I was a very little child, so I didn't really get the hype with his. So my big moments for me to see a live-action Spider-Man was going to the theater to see Andrew's. So his is also kind of nostalgic for me. I also just, for everything that takes the cake, it's the Gwen and him. To this day, if you see me on Twitter, I'm usually liking and retweeting on my own account the edits of Gwen and Peter. But I'm still gonna have to go with him to the heart. Make Amazing Spider-Man number 3. Give him his third movie, please, and thank you. But
he deserves it. He deserves a third movie.
He does. With a script, because
a better written one.
Yes, because this man is now, what did he just win? An Oscar or a Golden Globe? But he's won an Oscar. He's an Oscar winner and a Golden Globe winner, and you're gonna tell me this man can't act? That's a lie. You know
what he needs? He needs Kevin Feige to produce a movie of his to give him a real shot and put him on a level playing field, because whoever was in that production room for the Amazing Spider-Man franchise needs some help.
And it wasn't all bad, but it was not great.
But there's some holes.
Yeah. But that's my final answer. And with that takes us through all the categories of our Spider-Man debate. And before we get going fully, I'm going to give a shout out, of course, to Davis. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. This was great.
Yeah, and I mean, to his point, he was probably one of the, like, OGs in there with us when WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier were coming out. So, to be fair, if you look and you see we don't have podcasts for it, it's kind of because he was the only person that was our audience.
He was the original audience member, so give him a shout out.
That's me.
Yes. So, thank you for joining us. I'm sure he will be back further down the road for some other...
Hopefully.
Oh, I'm sure you will.
I'll bully you into it. It'll be great.
Yeah, that's usually how our friendship works.
Alrighty, well, since this is such a hot topic in the land of Marvel, we would definitely love to hear from you guys. So if you have thoughts on any of our opinions or want to share your own on any of the categories that we discussed today, please feel free to tweet us or email us, go on the blog, leave a comment, all that good stuff. We definitely want to hear from you and see what you're thinking in terms of your favorite Spider-Man, whether it be overall or for one of the individual categories. As always, if you're a fan of the show and you have not yet subscribed, please hit that follow, like, subscribe button on your platform of choice. And you can go ahead and feel free to leave us a rating or review if you feel so inclined. You can also check us out on Spotify. We have a playlist for different series as well as all of the different songs, or at least most of the ones that are available on Spotify. The songs that are heard in the different movies and shows. And last but not least, please make sure to follow the blog where we have lots of extra content. And right now, Katie's doing a fun little meme series because we don't have weekly shows. So all the memes are coming your way on a semi-regular basis. So definitely follow the blog to check that out.
And to finish wrapping up, make sure you guys are following Twitter. It is Let's Talk MFT. We are going to be on there all the time like I am already, but we release the podcast and the blogs on there, so you can get the links real easily off of there, and we retweet and like theories along with sharing our own. So definitely just one-stop shop. Go check that out. Go follow it. And as always, Marvel just blew your mind, so let's talk about it.